All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling one of the heavy hitters in macroeconomics, the famous and, yeah, sometimes controversial ISLM model. It's this classic tool that kind of lets us peek under the hood of an economy. So let's get into it.
I mean, think about it. It's a massive question, right? When a country's facing a recession or maybe inflation is just going through the roof, what levers can its leaders actually pull? And more importantly, how do they know what's going to happen when they do? This is the exact problem the ISLM model was built to help solve.
So think of it like a simplified map of the economy. It's brilliant, really. It connects interest rates with the market for actual stuff, goods and services, and also with the market for money itself. By doing that, it gives policymakers a way to predict how their big decisions, like changing government spending or adjusting the money supply, might send ripples through the entire system.
So, let's talk about how this tool actually works. For decades, this has been the go-to framework for getting a quick read on some really complex economic situations, even with all its controversies.
And, we have to get this out of the way right up front. The model has this weird reputation. On the one hand, it's incredibly practical for making those tough short-term calls. But on the other hand, academics just love to poke holes in its theoretical foundations. But for what we're doing today, we're really going to focus on its power as a pragmatic guide for thinking about policy.
The real magic of the model is how it combines two totally fundamental parts of the economy. First, you've got the market for actual stuff, goods and services. And second, you've got the market for money itself.
Okay, let's start with the IS curve. The I stands for investment, and the S for savings. Simple enough. This curve basically represents all the possible combinations of income and interest rates where the goods market is perfectly balanced. It's the sweet spot where the amount businesses want to invest is exactly equal to the amount that people and governments want to save.
This balance is captured in this little equation, where investment equals private savings plus what we call public savings, which is just taxes, T, minus government spending, G. But the core logic, the real idea here is pretty intuitive. When interest rates are low, it's way cheaper for businesses to borrow and invest, right? And that investment boosts the whole national income. When rates are high, well, the exact opposite happens. And that's why the IS curve slopes downward. It's just showing that inverse relationship.
Now for the other half of the puzzle, the L curve. The L here stands for liquidity preference, which I know is a super fancy term for just the demand for money, and M stands for money supply. This curve shows us where the financial side of the economy is in balance.
The thinking here is actually pretty simple. You and we need cash for everyday transactions. But holding on to cash means you're not earning any interest on it. Now, when the national income is high, people need more cash for all that buying and selling. To convince them to hold that cash instead of putting it into interest-bearing bonds, the interest rate has to be higher. So the LM curve slopes upward. And this whole thing is controlled by the central bank, which is the institution that sets the total money supply. Okay, so we have the goods market and we have the money market. What happens when we put them together? Well, that's when we find the economy's equilibrium.
And this right here, this is the heart of the model. There is only one single point, one combination of national income and one interest rate where both the market for goods and the market for money are in balance at the exact same time. This intersection is the economy's short-term sweet spot.
All right, now for the really fun part. Let's see what happens when policymakers try to move that sweet spot to actually improve the economy. This is where the model really starts to shine.
But hang on, before we do that, there's a really crucial distinction we have to make. The effect of any policy depends massively on the type of economy you're dealing with. A huge economy, like the United States, can actually influence its own interest rates. But a small, open economy, it basically has to take the world interest rate as a given. And believe me, this changes everything.
Let's start with our first test case. Imagine a small country that lets its currency value float freely on international markets. Think of a place like Canada or Australia. Okay, so the government tries to boost the economy by spending more. Let's follow the chain of events here. First, that new spending pushes the IS curve out, which starts to raise domestic interest rates. Now, those higher rates, they look really tasty to foreign investors, so money flows in, strengthening the local currency. But then, and this is the kicker, a stronger currency makes the country's exports more expensive for everyone else, so they buy less. And finally, that drop in exports pushes the IS curve right back to where it started. The final result? The initial boost is completely canceled out, or crowded out, by the fall in exports. There's zero net change to national income.
Crazy, right?
Now, what if the central bank tries something instead? First, it increases the money supply. This shifts the LM curve out and lowers the domestic interest rate. That lower rate causes capital to flow out of the country as investors look for better returns somewhere else. This outflow weakens the currency, which is actually great news for exporters. It makes their goods way cheaper for foreigners. This boom in exports then pushes the IS curve out, leading to a big, significant increase in national income. So what's the takeaway? In this scenario, monetary policy is incredibly powerful, while fiscal policy is, well, not so much.
Let's switch gears and move to our next scenario. We're going to keep the small open economy, but now it has a fixed exchange rate. The country has basically promised to keep its currency pegged to, let's say, the US dollar.
And here's the wild twist. The results are completely flipped on their head. In this world, fiscal policy becomes super effective and monetary policy becomes totally ineffective. So why? What's going on?
It all comes down to that fixed exchange rate. To defend the peg, the central bank basically loses control of its own money supply. See, if the government uses fiscal policy to boost the economy, it pushes up interest rates. Normally, this would strengthen the currency, but the central bank has to step in. It's forced to print more money and sell its own currency to keep the exchange rate stable. So it's forced to reinforce the fiscal push. But on the other hand, if it tries its own monetary expansion, the capital flows out and it's forced to buy back its currency, which completely undoes the action it just took.
So, after running through these different scenarios, what's the big picture? What's the main takeaway from all of this?
This slide just lays it all out so clearly. It's fascinating. For a large economy, both policies kind of work. For a small economy with a flexible exchange rate, monetary policy is the absolute star of the show. But you fix that exchange rate and suddenly fiscal policy takes center stage. And this, right here, is probably the most important lesson from the ISLM model. There is no single one-size-fits-all solution for managing an economy. Whether a tax cut or an interest rate change is going to work depends entirely on the country's size, its relationship with the rest of the world, and its exchange rate system.
And we'll end on this thought. The ISLM model gives us this incredibly powerful framework for thinking through economic cause and effect. But the real world, as you know, is infinitely more complex. The model is a map. It's not the territory itself. It helps us ask the right questions. But finding the perfect answers, well, that's what keeps economists arguing and what makes it the dismal science after all.